Mirror's Edge for the Xbox 360. It is also available on the PlayStation 3. Now, Mirror's Edge, I've been looking forward to this game for a while, and I was very excited to pick it up, and I finally beat it, and I'm very satisfied with it. Basically, there's a couple of different ways you can describe this game in terms of its genre. You can call it, the way I prefer to call it, a first-person platformer. Think of it like a Mario game in the first person. Or you can think of it as, a first-person action-adventure game. You can't really think of it as a shooter, because even though guns are in the game, it's really not the main focus. I actually chose to play through the game without firing one bullet, which is the way I think the game was meant to be played. But anyway, let's get into the story here. You basically play as Faith, and you're a runner in this sort of futuristic type city in the future. And the government has everything really strictly moderated in terms of how information gets around. So these runners basically jump around rooftops and hand off information to one another. No computer kind of stuff. They just run around and deliver this stuff. So it's your job as Faith to run around and avoid this sort of government and deliver information, but really the story has a lot more to it about your missing sister and finding out who did this and did what, and betrayal. Really, the story is not the main focus of this game. The main draw of the game is the gameplay mechanics, and basically there's 9 different chapters. Each chapter is broken up into different checkpoints, so if you do die, you can restart from the last checkpoint. But there's 9 chapters. Each one presents you into a different location. However, the whole game does kind of feel the same sometimes, I will say that. A lot of times, you're in these different kind of locations. You're like in a construction yard with, a big crater in the middle, and you gotta jump on that, and you're like in the outside as opposed to always being inside with, the very tight corridors. And really, the one other cool thing about the game are the graphics and how awesome, the visuals are, the colors. I mean, you'll be running outside and you'll bust into a door, and bam, you're like greeted with this really bright green environment. It's like really chromatic and crazy. I mean, the visuals are amazing. If you're into art whatsoever, you're gonna really appreciate the graphics this game has to offer. One of my favorite parts in the game has you running through outside in an alleyway, and it starts off blue, and as you're running it kind of gets into this magenta color, pink color, and it alternates, and there's really not a lot of action going on. You're kind of running along, there's no enemies, but man, you're just going through there and it looks so cool. And then you get out into this outside area and it's like a big shot of orange, and it just looks spectacular. And that was really the first time the game was very early on. I was like, this is going to be one of my favorite games ever. I just love the presentation style of this game. Sometimes you're in a building and it goes from really dark, stark red, and then you exit out of an elevator and it's this really cool yellow. I mean, everything is themed around that one color. And it's nothing's really ever been done like this before. I like to compare it to the movie THX 1138, if any of you ever saw that, from George Lucas. Think of it like in that environment, like this futuristic kind of quiet, stark white environment, but then they got these shots of color every now and then. Or it's sort of like a Blade Runner, only without all the grim kind of environments. But I will just say, it's not all squeaky clean kind of white, pale, or colored environments. They do thrust you into situations where there's sort of like a more grittier, realistic look to it, without all the white walls and the colors, where it sort of looks like, if you've played Portal, which I'm sure a lot of you have, you know how that game is, where sometimes you kind of get behind the scenes, especially later on in the game, and it seems like a play stage where, there's the model kit, but behind the scenes you kind of got like all the realistic kind of stuff. They got that kind of going on in here as well. Another part of the game is, instead of, just running through the levels and getting from point A to point B, they have collectibles for you to find. So as you're going through the levels, you'll see like this red mark on the wall, or some red mark to indicate that there's a bag nearby. And these bags just serve as mere collectibles, like coins are in Mario games, and rings are in Sonic games. But you'll see these around, and it's kind of an incentive to collect them all. There's 30 throughout the game. And we'll say this game does kind of creep me out sometimes, because you're kind of going through a city that seems abandoned, and these buildings that seem so empty and the music plays into it. It's just very creepy sometimes. But it's not all empty, you know. Sometimes you'll walk out onto a balcony and you'll see, you know, pedestrians walking down below and cars driving by. So it kind of gives the game life that would otherwise, the game would feel kind of empty, a little too empty without these certain sequences where you do see forms of life where you normally wouldn't. Another part of the game's presentation is it kind of tells the story through these weird cutscenes. Sometimes they look really awkward, like the animations just don't match up at all. And then other times, you know, they're not that bad. You know, you can tell they kind of put some work into it. The shadows and the lighting and the animation isn't that bad. But it just doesn't really fit into the game. It kind of feels like they ran out of time or were rushed or just didn't feel like working with their in-game engine to kind of put into cutscenes. And the really cool thing about this game is a lot of its story is actually told very non-direct. You know, you'll be walking through a building and you'll go into an elevator, and most of the game, a lot of the games, like non-direct story is told in elevators where they have scrolling text and you get to read it, or on computer screens that are kind of hidden and you get some little kind of Easter egg kind of stuff. Or you can listen to the radio chatter throughout the buildings. Just little touches like that really add to the game's overall feeling. It's really nothing like we've ever played before. So I chose to go through the game without using any weapons. I never fired a single bullet. And that can be hard at times, but it's a lot of fun when you're not in direct combat, because sometimes the combat can be a little hokey and it doesn't always work that well. The game is quite short though. Some chapters take anywhere from 15 minutes. Some of them take about an hour, believe it or not. Very few of them do though, depending on how many times you try over again, or might just be a lengthy chapter. Now, that's a big word in this game, is try. You're going to be doing a lot of do-overs, especially in some sections where you might not really have an idea what to do and you kind of mess up sometimes, or there's enemies that kind of overwhelm you. However, you do get a very good sense of satisfaction in this game, where the levels are kind of linear. However, there's multiple paths that you can take between each one. So, you know, it's not like it is a linear game, but there's different paths that you can take on that linear path to get to where you need to go. However, there are times where there's a set way that you have to go, and the path there is not very distinct. And that's where the fun comes in, of trying to look around and figure out where you gotta jump to get up to where you gotta go. And if you hold down the B button, it'll actually point you in the direction of where you gotta go, so you never really feel like you're lost. And another thing about the game is they have this runner vision where things are highlighted in red, where you should be looking and grabbing onto, like a box will highlight in red to tell you that you kind of need to jump off of there. Pipes will highlight in red to tell you to go this way, and it's not a bad thing either, because it keeps you running, it keeps you going at a fast pace. And there's a lot of content in this game, you know, there's a lot going on in these levels. And the fact that the game is so short is because you're constantly running through them. If this was a third-person kind of slow, stealthy game, it would probably be a pretty lengthy game, but the fact that you're running constantly kind of shortens the fact of, you know, they did put a lot of work into these levels, but it's just that you run through them so fast. And sometimes you do just want to slow down and take in the environment. You know, if you're out on rooftops, and it looks amazing sometimes, like you just want to stand there and look around at the beautiful landscapes. And I don't want to spoil all the environments for you, but sometimes, you know, it'll shift into a nighttime setting where it's like really dark and the lighting is awesome. Just things like that really add to this game. There's also a time trial mode where it'll take you out of the story setting, like lose all the cutscenes and everything like that, and basically you're just going from checkpoint to checkpoint to best your time. And this is going to be a really it's going to be the lasting appeal for many people, where, you know, after you beat the campaign, you're going to want to go to the time trials and try and beat your friend's scores. And the cool thing is it'll tell you the best time in the world as well as your best friend's scores time on that specific level, which is pretty cool. There's also extras where you get to unlock artwork, you get to unlock videos throughout the game that you've seen, and the really cool part is the pretty big list of all the soundtracks in this game and the music in this game is very good. So there you have it, guys. That's my review of Mirror's Edge. I really do enjoy it. It's not a perfect game by any means. It does have a couple of flaws. However, it's very original, and for that fact, with the visuals and the gameplay, it makes up for its mistakes, and I really enjoyed it. Overall, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It's very good. I would definitely recommend a rent for this game.